to Layne Hartsell. He's a research professor at Center for Science, Technology, and Society, Chulalongkorn University, and in the 3E program at the Asia Institute in Tokyo. He's currently working on ethics and current thought in 3E, energy, economy, environment, and in open source system domains. Okay, Dr. Layne Hartsell, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you to Dr. Alanor for the opportunity today, and also to Professor Suraj, who I've known and worked with for many years. And actually, I'm currently leaving the Chulalongkorn. I'm going to be at the Asia Institute, and also I'm just a regular research professor. I work on grants. I'm not like like in the academy and making decisions in the universities. I'm just a regular researcher. In my professional work, you mentioned that I work on ethics and technology, and I'm not a metaphysician, but my intention today is based on an ongoing personal reflection over the past 25 years as a quasi-monastic, but more as a layperson, really, concerning the topic of causation and the foundations of science and causation in Buddhism. So, for example, Nagarjuna and so forth. It seems to me that most people are interested in these topics, and when I talk to people, yeah, these are really interesting topics. And sometimes people, they have some time in their life when they can take some classes, or they read a lot, and they take more of a deep dive into it. And I've done this a few times in my life. So it's not uncommon what I'm talking about today, although I'll probably go in a little more depth. And I realize that I'm speaking to a forum of scholars here in ASEAN that are, of course, much more knowledgeable than I, such as Professor Suraj, and certainly more accomplished. But I'm interested in hearing your responses to how I approach the topic of causation. And these are, of course, notes that I've compiled in over 25 years, including meditation and so forth, practice. But as a preliminary note, I rely on the cosmological argument and reasoning for most of my exploration. I'm not looking at the religious revelation or anything like that. And I also only mention quantum mechanics and mathematics related specifically to natural constants, Planck's constant, Planck time, Planck's length, and so forth, and how we determine dimensional space. I'll also give mention to non-local causality and so forth. So the history in the modern history goes back to a famous debate that was recorded in 1947 and published in 1948 on the BBC by two philosophers, Frederick Copleston, who's a Jesuit priest and philosopher, and Bertrand Russell, who is an analytic philosopher. And they considered this cosmological argument, or the argument of continuum, a foundation in Aquinas and Leibniz. The core of the debate considers causality concerning the argument from contingency. And basically, if this causes that, then there's a chain of causal sequence. And so the question is, where are we concerning reality, first cause, and so forth? So science, as I use it here, is based on data from the senses and causal reactions. But where over the last 400 years, the scientific project has had to scale back its expectations, particularly concerning matters of causation, probability, measurement, consistency, estimations, and all rather than the absolute. Normal causation, of course, as anyone here would recognize, it's sufficient for everyday life. If I go to work or go jogging or eat food or something, causality is fine for that. But when it comes to quantum physics and philosophy, the matter of causation, of course, is explored much more closely And we do this to see if we can discover new things, see if there's something new that we can learn and discover about nature. So there'll be a difference between philosophy and science here. And David Albert, the physicist and philosopher, says that the difference between philosophy and quantum science today is how many formulas are in a paper. If there are less than 2 mathematical formulas, then the paper is philosophical. And if there are more than 2 formulas, then the paper is physics. So I will only use 2 mathematical formulas today, and making this a philosophical discussion in metaphysics. Popular writings in science do at times sound like philosophy. So like Brian Greene or David Albert or David Deutsch, Sabine Hossenfelder, and so forth. But without knowing the formulas and the philosophy, it's hard for a regular person to understand exactly what's going on. Although they get it, a regular person can get an understanding of quantum physics, and I found people quite interested in both of these areas, philosophy and quantum physics. So my reflection today concerns the argument from contingency as metaphysics, as I said, rather than theology. And in the argument, at some point, causation has to give way to logic, that there's either an endless causation, which would then be acausal, sounding like Nagarjuna, particularly his fourth case, or there's a first clause, such as in Aristotle's work and Catholicism. The problem, of course, could be left at a supreme being, which is what Copleston does and defines an omniscient, personal being that's both designer and creator, the theist perspective. So the Aristotelian view leaves off there. But there's another question, of course, that arises that, and Copleston points it out, that if we accept causation, what is it that concerns the essence of what is observed in a chain of causation? This causes that, and so forth, in a full aggregate of causation. It might be that there's causation or even a first cause, but what is the essence? And I think this is what Buddhism might get at, particularly with actually Gautama and the early 5, and also with Nagarjuna, who Nagarjuna seemed to tease out the dependent origination from sunyata, or the selfless part. But I'm not a Dharma teacher, and I don't know how to go into that. But the history seems to be that was closer together with Gautama Buddha. But by the time that it got to Nagarjuna, that the sunyata was distinguished, but not separate, of course. So to look for Copleston, who's a Westerner, he says that what if it's chocolate all the way down? So if it's chocolate here, the essence of it is chocolate, then it also is chocolate at another place. So there's this sense of like wetness of water, or the taste of chocolate would be the essence of the system, whereas causation would be the manifestation of interactions. And I'm going to go to Nagarjuna to rely on this particular part. So finally, to have the debate, to even have this particular debate on cosmology, there has to be a presupposition that there's something rather than nothing. So let me cut off nihilism right here at the beginning. So if you look at Leibniz and so forth, we accept that there's something rather than nothing, because in the negative, nihilism would say, or it undoes itself by making a statement about anything, including nothing. If I'm a nihilist and I make a statement that there's nothing, then automatically there has to be something. That's a dead end. So we can drop nihilism in favor of something and move on to I think what is more the more substance of the arguments. So the version of the argument that Copleston gives comes from Aquinas and Leibniz, and it goes like this. Premise number 1 is everything in the universe is contingent. For example, my parents had to meet before I could be born. Or if you think of oxygen as a contingency in not only life, but for everything. So we have to have oxygen as a contingency for living. But also, if we were to say take away oxygen, then metals metals usually oxidize in the presence of oxygen. And if oxidation were to go away, then the metals would fuse together. So if we were to, intellectually remove oxygen out of the system, then the whole thing comes apart, including us. So that's the contingent part. The premise number two that Copleston gives is that the universe is an aggregate of all things in it. And then the first conclusion is, therefore, the universe is contingent. This is likely an error to say that if we come from our mothers, then the universe also comes from a mother too. So Russell interjects here, and I think correctly, that there's a problem with the reasoning. And actually, I tend to think Copleston just made a mistake here, because he certainly knows the problem of the fallacy of having something small relate to the larger, in the sense that the larger is that same thing. So with the fallacy of composition, I think that he makes an error, probably as a mistake, because also we have to remember the social tensions at the time. Russell and Copleston were probably, opponents and at odds with each other. And I think Copleston just makes a mistake here. But anyway, it's a mistake. So that the universe is contingent is perhaps a false conclusion. But let's go on to the next premise that Copleston gives, related to sufficient reason from Leibniz, that the contingent things require an explanation. So there has to be a reasoning process to clarify all of this, which leads to the conclusion, therefore, the universe requires an explanation. Russell again objects, of course, and then the final premise and conclusion is that an infinite regress of explanation is not an explanation. So a causal chain would be an infinite regress without stopping at some point. And Copleston, of course, inserts a necessary being. So therefore, an entity that possesses necessary existence must be needed to explain the universe. And there's another error here in the logic, because if you make an analytical statement that there's a necessary being, a being within itself, and then require the synthetic proof that there's a necessary being, this particular logic falls apart. Russell interjects again. So while Copleston stays with the Aristotelian conclusion, Russell gives some, I think, more interesting things. Conclusion one is that the universe doesn't need an explanation, or it's what he would call a brute or obvious fact. Number two, to mix an analytical proposition with a synthetic requiring proof is, of course, incorrect. And number three, and which is more important to or pertinent to what I'm exploring here today, is that we simply lack imagination. So when I considered this debate and the matter of causation, to speak with you more, so that I could put it forth more clearly rather than just in my head and in my notes, I thought about quantum physics also. And if dimension is conserved all the way around, then what effects do dimension have on causality? In the fact that, for example, if there's an observer and the problem is still there, then is there dimension of up, down, left, right, and so forth? Because if there is, then we still have an observer within the system. Planck length is given as a square root of the gravitational and reduced Planck constant over the cube of the speed of light. So this comes out to be 1.62 times 10 to the negative third 35 meters, which is very, very, very tiny, right? And I'm told by quantum physicists that I've consulted with that this is, at this point of Planck time and Planck length, that dimension breaks down. Planck time is 5.39 times 10 to the negative 44 seconds. So at this point, dimension would break down. However, when we look at what the mathematics says and what the actual measurements say, is that this length is an actual measurement of the precision that we can see, not of the actual smallest length. So I want to have that in the background as a background for the realm of what causation is where causation is happening. So in what we call the Western philosophy, the matter of contingency is seen at the beginning of modern science. So I'm not going to go back much more into ancient philosophy as I did before. But the mechanics of modern science were almost immediately seen through by Galileo. In other words, mechanics being an actual reality receded in strength of argument to the facts of the natural world, of the actual world. That there are mechanics is fine, but that the entirety of nature is mechanical is a problem. And Galileo glimpsed that as incorrect. But this was in the 1620s, so about 400 years ago. Galileo wrote these words in the dialogues concerning nature, basically that there's gravity in nature that we don't understand. So if you drop a stone, it goes down, or if you throw a stone, it goes up, but there's no mechanical connection pushing each thing along. And he basically said, well, we don't know what that is. We call that gravity, and we call the other nature. But the idea was, he went on to say, is what is the essence of that movement, anticipating of Newton's action at a distance. And as to the cause of infinite other motions, he just called it all nature. So at this point, with Galileo in the 1620s, nature becomes a placeholder, contrary to what many people have said over the last centuries. Already nature was becoming a placeholder, not an absolute objective thing that we can observe. Galileo went on, and I'll quote him directly. He says, there are limitations of human understanding entirely unimaginable to us. It is extreme rashness to make human abilities the measure of what nature can do. Much of this discussion is from the second day of the dialogues there in his work, the one that got him into trouble, a lot more trouble. And then about a half century later, Newton would write that we are like children at the sea who can see the sand and the waves close by, but out beyond is the vast ocean. We can't understand that. He would also find himself in a battle with Leibniz for having resurrected the ghost, or the ghost of the scholastics and the peripatetics, that we might say here. But Newton, he wasn't so much interested in exercising the ghost, quoting, but the realization of the limitations of knowing the physical. And he was preoccupied with action at a distance and the realization of human limitations, whereas Leibniz thought Newton was regressing back to mysticism. So as we know, Newton was incorrect in that mechanics and matter had moved farther out to sea, away from our understanding. And today physicists are still looking for most of the matter in the universe. Doesn't mean that Newtonian mechanics isn't right, but physicists are still looking for the matter, for most of the matter in the universe. And just concerning these points, I rely on Peter Mackamer and Stillman Drake, who are major scholars on Galileo and Newton. So the quantum physicists today speak of indeterminacy and spooky action at a distance. This latter term comes from a letter from Einstein to Niels Bohr in 1947 about Einstein's troubles with quantum mechanics. And that was actually based on an earlier conference in 1927, where they called it peculiar action at a distance. Concerning action at a distance or non-local connections, I just want to say a quick word about problems of psychophysical phenomenon and actual physical phenomenon. So physicist Sabine Hostenfelder, who's working today, I think she's at CERN, she clarifies the difference between non-local causality and local correlation with a simple, like she uses a simple example. So if you have a pair of socks, say one sock is yellow and the other one's blue, and you mail these socks to different places, and when the person receives the package and opens the sock opens the package up and they see a yellow sock, then immediately they know that there's a blue sock in the other package. This is a variation of the Einstein-Podolsky-Rosen paper from 1935. But we can see that in this, as Sabina says, this is clearly not a case of non-local causality. It's just local correlation. And she says there's correlations all through nature. And just to give an obvious example, was here in the pandemic, you could see all kinds of crazy correlations that people are making and so forth. So we can see that, that yes, we humans do use our senses to make scientific observations, but not all observations are scientific. A lot of them are based on just strange correlations and selection. So there's no physical non-local connection such as is inferred by the Einstein-Podolsky-Rosen paper. She says that we have to be careful with both reasoning, mathematics, and empirical reality when it comes to causation. And these are more clues as I move on to Nagarjuna. So it may be that Nagarjuna slightly pulled back the veil concerning what is there, what is real, and at the same time concerning how causality works. Perhaps dependent origination is well. I don't think perhaps. I think dependent origination is predicated on interdependence, and this provides light into the matter of this causal process. So Nagarjuna didn't have the tools of modern science. So in the future, personally, I want to look at some of the findings of the physicists and see if these come together with this interdependency phenomena. I also want to look at Avicenna from Islam and Candia Romp from the Native Americans and see what they had to say about that. But I'm just beginning on that part of the exploration. But so far, a tentative conclusion of my talk today could be that uncertainty goes a ways towards understanding. However, a further simplification to openness seems to me to be possible, and I'm going to make the case here in my conclusion. So from Nagarjuna, I found something interesting that seems to be a decent explanation, so hear me out. His most well-known discussion on causation has 4 components about how things can be causally brought about. The first proposal is that things can come about from themselves. Doesn't seem to make a lot of sense, and it kind of echoes and anticipates Hume when we talk about a causal field. If we can see that something doesn't bring about itself, but it could be that there's a causal field that we can't detect due to all of the complexity, and we can't make the inferences that bring about, this particular effect. So that again anticipates Humean inference or skepticism. Number 2, from other things, cause happens. So this causes that, which is basically what I was talking about earlier at the beginning. But we run the risk, as Copleston points out, of an infinite chain of explanations, which doesn't explain anything, or an infinite change of causation. Number 3 is things come about both from themselves and from other things. So Nagarjuna just cleverly combines 1 and 2 here. In this case, it would be like the block of marble. So if you have a block of marble, inside it's a statue, but you have to have a sculpture to bring out the statue. So the sculptor cuts away the marble and so forth until the statue comes out. This type of causation is what he calls from both themselves and other things. And then finally, Nagarjuna again cleverly sees that the other 3 may not do it, and so he moves all of those out of the way, and he says that causation can come from neither this or that. This is only a conclusion in sense of adding on to the above, and since the other 3 are insufficient. Then it seems to me that there's an acausal factor inserted here. I don't know. However, given that we think science works, then it seems that the limits of our reasoning or cognition need to be explored, and that's what I think is the case. Therefore, there not only there not only seems to be some problem with reasoning, but principally that cause and effect are qualitatively distinct or independent. That's the problem with the reasoning. But there seems to be the limitation of our human ability in that if we look at the essence of dependent origination, then there would have to be independence as that. So I don't take up the matter of dependent origination with the 12 factors such as ignorance, karma, consciousness, and so on. I'm looking at the actual interdependence related to the metaphysical system. So let me provide some subjective experience and some tests and clues that I think might bring some of the above out and then provide a tentative conclusion. So in my own life, I've practiced meditation, taken time in nature, like many have done, and I'm sure all the people in this have done, and empirical reality from science or knowledge from experiments, and then what I call subjective experience as a correlation to experiments, calls me to think about the situation, since it seemed to me that interdependence takes us farther than the argument of contingency, and also part of Russell's conclusions from the debate. It also seems that the limitations of the argument from contingency show the limitations of reasoning about both science and religion. Reality sets up these experiential tests that I'm going to give you, but they're not anything that I found that you can create an empirical experiment with. The first one, well, first of all, when thinking about causal or acausal or non-causal, dreams are interesting to use as a metaphor or as an inquiry. So number one is, if we dream and see a world of things, and if the dream is not like a memory dream of the past, but a creative dream, then in the dream, we see things happening. We see a tree, we see cars, we see people moving about, we see interactions and cause and effect. We also see desire and satisfaction of desire. But then when we wake up, we say, well, we dream such and such, but once we are awake, we don't make a distinction between things in our dream. Everything in the dream seems like a fabric of a dream, all one thing, like a holistic view. And we say just a dream, as if no big deal. At the same time, there's the metaphor, at least, of interdependence within the dream. So the dream things actually are independent if they're just one whole view. I don't mean to establish the principle of independence with this example, but to point to a clue. And I suppose that we could say that dream things are also separated in a cause and effect way. However, we usually don't assume that we assume that a dream is a whole image, and we do this automatically. So my next example will question the assumption that the image is just a dream. So in my second example, and I'm almost finished here, the second example concerns the case where when we are asleep and dream, and then our alarm wakes us up and we go out of bed and take a shower and eat and so forth and go to work, all is fine, of course, at that point. And then our alarm wakes us up and we get out of bed and shower and eat and so forth. And somewhere in that, we realize that we already did this that morning. The alarm must have been a dream alarm. Now this is puzzling, right? So it seems to me that we're unable to delineate which of these states is the most real, and it's going to pose a problem for causality. So which one has separate causal things and which one has dream things, and which things are causally tied and can be explained through interdependency? In either case, unless there's some other phenomena in the dream, like I'm flying or some kind of something that violates the laws of physics, I'm unable to distinguish between these two states. And with these two examples, I conclude that it's actually an open question about causality. And then I could go on to another question. So that's really the end of, that's really my conclusion about the matter of causality, that it's an open question, partly because it's hard to delineate between different states, and also because the quantum, what we find from empirical quantum mechanics and what Nagarjuna shows, it makes it all very super difficult to understand. But there's another final example that I'll share with you that fits in but peripherally, and that's the collapse of dimension. So when I mentioned Planck time and Planck length, my question to the quantum physicist was, if you have the Large Hadron Collider, or if you have the quarks and mesons, do they have dimension? Is there an up, down, left, right, and all of that? And if there is, then what is this interaction still happening that's going on? It's not just measurement. So the basic experience that I'm talking about is, I'm sure that you all have had it, is you could be sitting in meditation or reading a book, and all of a sudden you recognize that dimension has gone away. There's no dimension. There's no up, down, right, left, and so forth. And then in my case, I experience a sense of startle, and I kind of, as soon as I do that, all the dimension comes back in, and I could be awake when this is happening. It's not a dream. So when this happens, and when the person comes back into dimension, I ask myself, is that a psychophysical state? Maybe some kind of neuron kind of thing. Maybe the frontal cortex goes into some kind of alpha, beta, delta waves. But the other part of the aspect is that the cochlea in the ears seem to work. So when I go into that state, I don't fall out of my chair. So the cochlea mechanism, going from the mechanics and with the cochlea in the ear into the brain and the electrochemical system, it seems to hold me up in the chair, whereas the perception or the sense of dimension goes away. And if that could be tested somehow, I'm not sure, but I wanted to mention that as part of the matter of dimension. So in conclusion, my conclusion is actually really short. My conclusion could be more in the area of philosophy of psychology rather than metaphysics, though I look at metaphysics to arrive at this. The conclusion that we simply don't know, or that we're limited, is reasonable, and in fact, it seems necessary given the situation. But at the same time, it seems to me to reserve ourselves with not knowing as a negative connotation. And I think what might be better is that whatever is going on is an open question. I think concerning human psychology, the orientation we take actually matters, not as an effect on physical reality, but the attitude of openness might be a good prescription. So not as an ethic, but as a choice for continued exploration. So the Zen, there's a saying in Zen that says, quote, "Stay with don't know mind." It seems to me to be too strong, but I get the idea, like a teacher, the teacher-student relationship, this might be useful in a certain set of conditions. But I think the point there is not to put the mind into a stupor with drugs or not paying attention or whatever, but to keep a taut mind, not too rigid, not one of stupor. But how to do this is a matter for meditation teachers and Dharma teachers. But what the conclusion that I get that is psychological is the fact of the attitude and outlook found in openness towards the approach to metaphysics and physics. Open, sincere wonder. Open, sincere wonder, I think, is the best conclusion. My friend Jan Crick from the Netherlands, he said to me, he's written about Leibniz and Chinese philosophy, and he said to me, quote, the other day, actually, he said, "There's no sign indicating that we're leaving the cosmos." So let me finish there with that. Thanks. I finished up.
Thank you, Dr. Hartsell, for the wonderful presentations on dependent origination and the relation with cosmological argument and quantum physics. And now I open the floor to question and answer sessions. If you have any question, you can just turn on the mic and post the question directly to Dr. Hartsell, or you can simply type down your questions in the chat box. Dr. Hartsell, I found your presentation very interesting. I have several questions, or probably my own comments about your presentations. Okay, let me open my video. I don't feel comfortable talking without showing myself, so I open my video so you can see me. You talk about the dependent originations or dependent arising and cosmological arguments. I found these two concepts or these two things are not mutually exclusive, because dependent originations, even though they both cosmological argument and dependent originations talks about what we understood as causations, but it seems to me that dependent originations differ from cosmological arguments in this respect. Cosmological arguments want to establish that the idea of infinite regress is impossible. There must be a first cause, whereas the dependent originations, I don't think it embraces that. It rejects the idea as there must be a first cause, unmoved or uncaused cause. It's endless. It is when we talk about causation, we tend to think that X occurs, Y follows. Like the example that you use, I cannot exist without my father and my mom. You know what they do what. So, but in dependent originations, I think the idea that causation is much more multifarious. Like it doesn't simply X cause Y, or X is the effect of Y is the effect of X. There are many factors. There are many reasons. There are many, not just ontological or phenomenological or epistemological. That's why I don't think cosmological is in line with dependent originations. So when we talk about causations, I don't think you can do some ontological interpretations or epistemological commitments or even psychological interpretation of the idea of dependent originations. Is, if I understand the Buddha correctly, the Buddhist idea of the causations, it involves so many things. We simply cannot pick one. This is this cause of this thing and the effect of this thing, and that's why I don't think dependent originations and cosmological arguments, they are in friendly terms, because cosmological arguments want to establish the existence of God. By rejecting the idea of infinite regress is impossible. Of course, they appeal to many, like the Hilbert infinite, the paradox, the hotel things. I can remember where there's
yes,
possible. Yes,
the infinite hotel.
Yeah, yes, but I don't think the idea of dependent originations can establish God as the primary origins of everything, because it seems to embrace the idea of samsara, endless, and the reason why we have this dukkha, and that's my point. And the second one is maybe you should. I'm not clear about the relation between dependent origination and quantum physics. Maybe you should give more explanations, because I thought it's very interesting. Maybe you can give me some clarifications. That's all. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Hartsell.
Yeah, thank you so much for that comment. And I would like to talk to you more about this. When Sabine Hosenfelder and David Albert are the two people that I'm relying on. When I ask about dimension, so say for example, you can the physicist can measure the mesons and quarks, subatomic particles, and so forth. My question to the physicists was, is there still dimension, during these measurements? And their response was that at Planck time, negative 44, and the Planck length at negative 3, whatever I said, at those dimensions, this system breaks down. And I said, well, this sounds like a material monist description of reality, but it doesn't do much more than, say, the cosmological argument where there's just a first cause. Interestingly enough, so that's what the quantum physicists say. But actually, when I did the calculations before I gave this talk, and I looked at the mathematics and the discussions at Fermilab, actually what the physicists say there is that this is the level of precision that we have, not the absolute level of size. All right, so that's one thing. But let me tell you, this is interesting. Plato took this up too in a certain way. What he said was that when dimension breaks down, it is possible. And he gets out of this first cause and this infinite regress by saying that the dimension goes into 2 dimensions. So if you have 2 dimensions, then you don't have a 3-dimensional space. And then he goes with the triangles. And then from the triangles, he gets, that there's a kind of infinite system of triangles. I can't explain that exactly, but I think maybe you've seen that before. So in the case of, I only referred to quantum physicists in 2 parts. One was the matter of dimension, because when I asked them about dimension, and the other was non-locality, where Sabine points out that correlations are all in nature, but a non-local, like a connection, like with Podolsky, Rosen, and Einstein, is that's another thing. That's something different.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Hartsell. Maybe we other participants have questions. Maybe we can look at chat box. There's one question from Dr. Lino. Dr. Layne, dependent origination was a cosmological answer given by Gautama in his disputation with some Hindu scholar long ago. 500 BC, there are 11 inscriptions in Southeast related to TO. The most complete is in Jakarta Library, carved in 11 plates of gold, dated 6th century from Salendra, with lack of scientific understanding around 500 before Common Era. How Gautama, Abhivan, and Juna in Second Era come up with cosmological answers?
This is what I see in this question is a matter of revelation, not a matter of empirical question. Is that correct, Dr. Alanor? So in other words, can we obtain information about the external world through pure reasoning or meditation or something? I'm not sure. I don't know this particular disputation between Gautama Buddha and the Hindu scholar, but I definitely want to learn more about it. I can give you for example, Kant. He thought that mathematics we could all figure out just right here in our heads, and we didn't need the external world. That was fine until you start traveling over large distances. So David Deutsch points out that if you take like a Kantian triangle, and you measure the distance from the sensor on the Earth to the satellite in space, far out in space, like the deep space probes, that the scientists, the cosmologists have to use calculus to adjust the mathematics of the triangle, because the triangle, the Pythagorean theorem is actually bent over that large space. So Kantian mathematics wouldn't hold up because you have to use calculus to adjust for the curvature of space. So in this case, revelation or mental mathematics and all that didn't work out. But it could be that Nagarjuna has this type of error because he nor Kant had this type of empirical information. I don't know.
It's interesting that Dr. Lino come up with this debate between Gautama and Hinduism, but actually there's one article, I think it's one of the groundbreaking articles in the last in the Buddhist scholarship, in the scholarship on Buddhism, by this Polish philologist. She argued that the Buddha is well aware of the Hindu cosmogony, and his especially the Upanishad and the Rig Veda. And when he talks about the Atman is used as metaphorically as fire, so the Buddha want to refute that the idea of this self, because it's not so much about God. Actually, the dispute between the Buddha and the Hindu scholars is much about whether there's whether we can consider there's an essence of everything. For example, is there self, the ultimate self, and during the classical period, the idea of Atman is that in the Rig Veda is characterized as in terms of metaphor of fire. There's an essence. This is universal, unchanging. So the Buddha thought that this is he disagreed with this. There's no essence. There's no universal self. There's no substantial self. So the term nirvana is actually according to this author Joyner, is a wonderful play words, blow off a fire. So when the classical Hinduism talk about a fire, and nirvana actually the blow out the fire. There's no self actually. So if you want to know about the dispute between the historical Buddha and the ancient Hinduism, I recommend you read this book, this article, Playing with Fire. I think
okay, got
Joanna,
it.
yeah, Joanna, in the chat box, I already attached it. Some scholars think that her work is one of the most important things in in the scholarship of Buddhism, because he managed to pinpoint the dependent originations into the Hindu cosmogony in the Rig Veda, and how the Buddha, the historical Buddha, attempt to dispute it. Okay, so that's my comment, my quick comment. Maybe you, Dr. Hartsell, can comment.
Thank you so much. And playing with fire is a good topic, because I knew as a ethicist rather than a metaphysician that if I came into this group and I talked like I knew something, that I would be playing with fire. That's why I said I'm a layperson and a lay monk.
Yeah.
So yes, I want to read the book. Thanks.
Okay. Any other questions? We have a very nice, very interesting discussion about Patiyasamupada. I think it's very mouthful to pronounce, but we prefer to use the English translations, DO, dependent ordinations. So there's one more question from Dr. Gino. It's more a comment rather than question, just to add a bit more. There's an inscription in ancient Java in 8th century mentioned that Akasa ether cause fire, cause of air, cause of water, cause of soil. Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
This literature is so rich from India and China, and I really want to do a lot more reading when I have more free time now that I'm leaving public work and doing more, study. So thank you all so much for taking the time to listen to me and Dr. Alanor and Professor Soraj. And
You can call me Dr. Shaf.
what's that?
You can call me Dr. Shaf only, yeah. Dr. Shaf, yeah. Okay, there's one book. I think if you want to interested this, maybe I should give you this Amazon link. It's called Fire, Death, and Philosophy, History of Ancient Indian Philosophy. I think it's.
Can I ask? Okay, I got the message here. Can I ask the group? Are there any Islamic metaphysicians here that know what Avicenna had to say about any of this?
Maybe Dr. Nurain can have something to say, because I think her PhD thesis is a bit more about Avicenna. Dr. Nurain, do you want to say something?
Okay, got it. And I was listening to one of the Theravada monks, and he says that in the Prajna Paramita, when it talks about form is emptiness, emptiness is no other than form, and repeats this process, he made a comment that I thought also was interesting. He said, but in that sutra, it doesn't talk about the essence of form and emptiness, which he thought is, going back to this argument I gave today, is interdependence. Do you also think the same thing?
Can you repeat your comment, please?
So when you chant, form is no other than emptiness, emptiness no other than form, this chant, which is great. The monk also said that what's inherent in that, or what the essence of that is interdependence itself.
I think the way I approach the idea of emptiness is probably, okay, maybe there's some many interpretation about Suyanta, emptiness. There's some metaphysical thesis, there's a linguistic thesis. I think the core idea of emptiness probably is there's no substance. There's no substance in everything. So when we say that stuff are made of atoms, and now we know the atoms are made of electrons and protons and neutrons, and electrons made of more subparticle, quarks and all those exotic subparticles. So as science grows, we discover more and more subparticles. So I think the Buddhist idea of Suyanta is far more radical than we give credit to, because
right.
When we talk about things, grass, rocks, we may think it's composed of some kind of concrete or reality, but the idea about dependent ordinations, it must caused by something else. There's nothing one fixed concrete causations. It's also we also influence the human language. Also influence how we understand the world, as much as the particle physics try to explain everything in terms of many exotic subparticles. So when some school of Buddhism say everything is empty, I think in literal sense, I think there's they have some things going on there. Everything is empty, as though in the, if we can shrink ourselves at the max length, or max the max scale of or how far we can, suppose we can shrink ourselves to the max scale. I think we can see lots of emptiness rather than stuff. So
okay, that's why I asked the quantum physicist, is there dimension at that level? That's why I asked that question.
yeah, that's good. That's good things to ponder. Yeah.
Because if dimension collapses, then there's no causal mechanism. But even if we say dimension collapses, where are we at with that? I don't know.
Yeah, because maybe
Dr. Soraj, I wouldn't. Is he there?
okay, maybe we can continue discussion as well.
Thank you.
Dr. Hartsell, I would love to hear. We love to extend this discussion as well. I think we continue with session 3. Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Hartsell, for your presentations.